Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We're going to make a start now. Thank you very much for joining us to the fourth in the ACMI series held in conjunction with the Australian Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. My name is Julian Sefton-Green, and I'll be, I suppose, your host for the event. It sounds a bit odd using that word. Before we begin, especially important in these times, we're going to begin with Deakin's acknowledgement of country.
Deakin University would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the unceded lands, skies, and waterways on which our students and staff come together. As we learn, teach, innovate, and research through virtually and physically constructed places across time, we pay our deep respect to the elders and ancestors who have cared for the country that you join us from. An ancient place where education, innovation, and knowledge transfer have taken place for many thousands of years. At Deakin, we aim to nurture and continue this important legacy whilst encouraging our communities to walk softly on country in the spirit of sustainability. In particular, we give gratitude to the elders and ancestors of Wadawurrung country, Wurundjeri country, and Eastern Maar country and beyond, where our physical campuses are located. Their contributions to our learning communities and environments are rich and highly valued. Deakin is committed to embedding Indigenous knowledges and perspectives in all disciplines that we teach, as well as advancing the self-determined interests of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, including treaty and truth-telling. As you move around our physical and virtual environments, take a moment to consider, appreciate, and listen deeply to the country beneath your feet.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all to this event to explore some of the implications of AI, if indeed artificial intelligence is either artificial or intelligent, in Kate Crawford's words, on education, learning and childhood. We have a group of people here together in the room, and there are, of course, both AI bots observing us and people on Zoom, and they are part of the event today. We're going to proceed in the following fashion. I just want to, just to say that the aim of this event is to ask a series of questions particularly relating to the ways that AI impacts on or affects the childhoods of young children, which is the particular remit of the Centre of Excellence. So we want to know, we've asked the speakers here today, and we want us all to consider, how do young children and their families understand AI? Where or how is it used in daily life? What do they or other actors want from it? What are people's concerns about AI? And in what ways is the idea of AI just a theoretical construct, or how is it actually impacting on people's everyday lives, everyday interactions, and the banalities of growing up and living in Australia today? And to begin to answer those questions, or to begin to address them perhaps might be fairer, we've got three speakers here today. And the way we're going to proceed is that I'm going to ask each speaker to come up in turn and make a short presentation to you, roughly about 15 to 20 minutes. And we'll ask the speakers to present sequentially. First, we've got Professor Andra Siibak, who's visiting us from the University of Tartu in Estonia, which of course has the reputation of one of the most digitalized governance systems in the world. Secondly, we have Dr. Heemsbergen from Deakin University, who's a scholar of new media. And thirdly, we have distinguished Professor Selwyn from Monash University, who has an international reputation in reflecting on some of the impacts of digital technologies on education in general. So I'm going to ask each of those speakers to make the presentation, and then I'll come up to the podium again, and we'll be able to have, and the panelists will sit in a awkward and vulnerable position in front of you, and we'll have the opportunity for you to ask questions which I'll moderate for the panel. And we're also going to be in a position to take questions and discussion online through the Zoom facility provided by the fantastic helpers here at the museum at ACMI. So first of all, I'd like you to welcome Professor Andra Siibak to the podium here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this event today, and I'm very grateful for the Center of Excellence for the Digital Child to have this opportunity to speak to you today and for this lovely visit I have had to Australia. So today what I'm going to give you some perspective about, or some hints, is mainly built upon the research that I have been doing with my good colleagues and students in Estonia, which indeed, as was mentioned before, is advertising itself as one of the most digitalized countries in the world. But what's of course also important to mention about Estonia is we are a very tiny nation, so considerably smaller than this city here. And we have been part of the Soviet Union and were under the Soviet rule for more than 50 years. And when we gained our independence in 1991, our government at the time decided that new technologies is exactly what is needed to catch up with the West. So we focused on having this so-called tiger leap to catch up with the West with the help of new technologies. And this really has affected our country and its development. And as you can see, technology is advertised to be our second language, in addition to Estonian, of course. But what this has resulted in with is that 99% of the population is indeed regularly logging into internet, and also 99% of our public services are online 24/7. And basically the only two things you cannot do online is to get married and get divorced. But what is also important in the context of today's event here is that we have a national AI strategy since 2019. And this is also something that has been announced, and different new initiatives that our government has taken from 2019 onwards is something that has been picked up also by international press. And of course, one of the things that might be most relevant in the context of today's event is the fact that Estonia is trying to become the first country in the world where public education is really precision education based, or we are moving on the AI-based personal learning pathways approach. So this is the cultural context where I come from, but obviously, of course, the topic of AI has been around, and currently we do know that there is so-called gold rush on this topic. But this is also something that we see around the world that is also affecting parenting and education systems everywhere. So, of course, I remember still the time when parenting, let's say also in Estonia, was based on Benjamin Spock and his world-famous book since 1946. I remember this book was on a special podium, let's say, in my grandparents' house, and my own parents used it in order to best develop me and my sister. But nowadays, present-day parents really do not need to, let's say, spend time or waste their time or reading books, because there is a plethora of different AI-based new technologies, wearables, and baby tech products which enable these first-time parents or parents in general to overcome with this difficult status that they have as parents. So there are so many different new products coming to the market on a daily basis. There are, let's say, some sleeping lamps that you can use, which are AI-based and hope to provide parents with information why their baby is crying. to detect from the cries of the baby whether the baby is hungry, whether they are sleepy, whether they are just anxious. There are also smart diapers which start to notify the parent when the baby has peed into the diaper, and then obviously these push notifications gently nudge the parent to take some action with that. Or many other different baby tech products like a smart pram, which is self-driving. So for instance, if you are also at the same time walking together with your toddler, the pram keeps on driving itself while you're minding the other child. But it also has brakes, so don't worry. So what this has come to is obviously that at the present era we can say that parenting practices really have become mediatized, and already more than a decade ago scholars started to notice that really this present-day parents' gaze has become technologized. And this also means that really rather than starting to master and learn these different parental competencies, they can be easily also purchased and consumed. And a few years back, Sun Sun Lim from Singapore wrote a wonderful book about transcendent parenting, saying that this kind of parenting that we have nowadays reached is actually timeless and relentless practice. So you cannot opt out of being a parent because of these new technologies, which are constantly at your service and notifying you whenever your child needs something. And this is also obviously the fact that all these baby tech and smart technologies companies have picked up and they are selling tons of promises, and at the same time also a lot of hype about the opportunities these technologies might offer. So here is just a few sentences I picked from random different baby tech websites of those various products. And as you can see, they promise you as a new parent some peace of mind. They promise you accurate monitoring. They promise you give you information exactly when the baby needs you the most. And they definitely promise to be baby-friendly and available anytime, anywhere, and for whoever. And of course, as these are AI-based technologies, then even if those technologies stay up at night, they do not need coffee in the morning, which is good. So what we have come to learn and study together with a good colleague of mine, Giovanna Mascheroni from Milan, we notice a strong trend towards normalization of data surveillance, or parental surveillance through the data. And this is especially something that is happening also in the households of Estonian parents, that this kind of use of new technologies by the parents has become to be known as a norm of good parenting. You should be plugged in all the time so as to be still considered a good parent. And we see that parents are really trusting the data because they believe it is objective, it's accurate, it's reliable in comparison to their very own defective and also deceptive gut knowledge that otherwise they might have as parents. And obviously this kind of objective knowledge is necessary in order to ensure your children's health and well-being and development is progressing as you have wished for. But also this kind of tracking continues, or the data surveillance continues while children grow slightly older. So in Estonia, we have also conducted some different studies related to the use of tracking technologies, child tracking technologies, which can come in different shapes and sizes, be it in terms of some kind of wearables, some kind of patches you can sew on the clothing or on the bags that when children go to school, or they could be also smart footwear, for instance. So in Estonia, we have tried to study also preteens, 7 to 12-year-olds, and their parents who then developing this kind of intimate surveillance on their children. And we come to learn that there are mainly 3 types of parents who tend to have specific views about tracking, and all these 3 different types then also engage in this tracking behavior. So one of these types is a trusting parent who really believes that whatever data these apps and wearables provide is something that enables them to keep their family safe, and also believes that as parents they do need to have control over their children at all times. Cautious parents, on the other hand, are really cautious because they do feel that tracking also exploits this kind of parental fears. But they still keep on tracking. And they also are aware that this kind of tracking devices could also have an impact on privacy and might not be that without potential risks. Careful authoritarian parents, on the other hand, believe that parents really have excessive control over children and need to have this excessive control, and they really have also trust issues with the children, so they keep on using these technologies because of that. And through the interviews we have had with different parents, they keep on saying the same thing. These technologies provide them with peace of mind, which is absolutely necessary for their whole family's sake. And oftentimes they say that they have never bothered to ask what their children think or feel about the use of tracking technologies. They even haven't thought about that this might be a good idea to start a conversation. And they also feel that through the use of these technologies, it really enables them to become better parents. Children themselves also, again, these younger age groups really feel that they do not mind being tracked, especially these compliant children who believe that parents have the right to control them and also at the same time admit that this is a topic that needs to be discussed within the family. Autonomous children, on the other hand, think that tracking apps can also be quite useful. And at the same time, they feel that they do not necessarily need to be used because they can manage quite well on their own without the parents lurking on them all the time. And privacy-sensitive children also have quite a good overview of how to avoid this kind of tracking, should it be necessary. But at the same time, one of the most interesting findings from this study was that especially privacy-sensitive children also think that they do not need to take themselves responsibility for their actions, safety and well-being, because there is always this big parent who is watching over, so the child doesn't need to be cautious themselves. And again, in the interviews, it was evident that oftentimes children found out about the tracking themselves. It wasn't something that was necessarily discussed with the parents, and they oftentimes also imagine how their life would be without this tracking always happening. And perhaps they think that when they reach puberty, this would be a kind of annoying thing when they want to have dates with friends and drink and smoke and do all the cool stuff that otherwise this tracking might distract. But it's just in the context of parenting when these AI technologies are being used. But if we think of in the context of education, then we see quite obviously that AI currently is being considered a perfect technological fix for whatever kind of problem there might be with our obsolete and oftentimes dysfunctional education systems. Again, this is something that technology companies and edtech companies would like the general public to believe in. And as I mentioned earlier, Estonia has decided that this is exactly the place where we should be investing in and developing this thing further. So since 2020, we have been moving towards this kind of personalized education approach, which in the hopes of it would then allow for the student to choose what, when, and with whom they can learn. So again, a very strong push towards studying something that is personally tailored just for you. And we have been also looking into how media tries to play out this kind of discourses in Estonia about the personalized learning pathways. And what we see is especially the emphasis of AI-based technologies enabling to have everything much faster. It would be much more intensive, and the learning and the whole education system would therefore be much more efficient. And definitely also enabling teachers to save tons of time. So these basically suggest that while people move in the speed of humans, data that these AI-based technologies are able to provide moves at the speed of light. And we need the speed of light in order to have an efficient and well-functioning education system. And another thing we have noticed in the media discourses as well is that when we talk about AI-based education, then it's not you, the student, who goes to school, it's the school that goes to you. Because there are also many technologies and platforms which actually provide the teachers with so-called pre-lease information about the moods, about the sleeping patterns of students, that later could be used within the classroom when designing the assignments and so forth. So we see also through different international case studies that we have conducted in Estonia that there is a really strong push towards something we refer to as doom monitoring, or basically indiscriminate and inaccurate surveillance of people in anticipation of the next bad thing, although nobody really knows what this next bad thing might actually be. And this tends to be quite a big and growing concern within education. So in conclusion, we see AI technologies being really providing tons of data, but this datafication not really only redefines the very boundaries of social knowledge, what we are able to know, but also what is worth knowing about our social worlds, and what can be also abstracted into and represented through the data that these technologies enable us to achieve. And in terms of parenting, we see that these parenting tools indeed one-sidedly try to focus on protective and preventive features, but rather oftentimes entirely really discarding the issues that are related to digital rights of the child. And therefore, from the studies we have done, we see that rendering children's bodies and qualities and behaviors into digital data, we are really turning young people and children into data subjects who are therefore not only positioned with partial and reductionist data templates, with the possibility that their complexities and personalities and opportunities may be circumscribed, but also they are represented and spoken for in ways they cannot understand and definitely also cannot control. And also we see that this kind of algorithmic classifications do tend to regulate and govern individuals' position in society by shaping the directions and also potentially futures that become available to them. And thus these are also leading to new forms of digital and social inequality. So although the use of AI-based technologies could be also generating tons of new opportunities, also in the realm of personalized education and social inclusion and whatnot, it may also result in discrimination and exclusion and marginalization, and therefore we should be really thinking this through before we adopt all kinds of AI-based technologies, be it in parenting or be it in education. With this, I stop. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I saw your last slide. It had one direction that said the other way, and I think that's where we're going to go for part of my talk anyways, which is titled On Synthetic Parenthood. In their bustling grade 1 classroom, somehow snuck in between snack time, outside play, math lessons, and the endless distractions of childhood generally, a superhero was born. Somewhat limited by the dexterity my son had with pencil and paper, Banana Man took shape. A seemingly innocuous hero, Banana Man's vivid exploits took shape against the dastardly pizza pieces who wanted to eat the galaxy. And of course, Banana Man was always one step ahead through his giant banana-shaped spaceship. The saga of Banana Man and how pizza pieces continue to plot and destroy the galaxy have engrossed bedtime ever since my son drew these characters and brought home his 4-page graphic novel. Banana Man's serialized adventures have continued almost every night with the kids nestled in their bunk beds and me lying beneath them, thumbing through my phone. Not distracted, but engaged with an expanding set of capabilities of collaborative story making, invoked by a network of most probable ideas, off somewhere near San Francisco, I think, nested in its own server bed, and potentially distributed closer to home here on Amazon servers, powered by Tesla batteries somewhere off in the desert. Good night, batteries. Good night, fiber. Good night, neural net. Speaking of Amazon, our last family vacation had our kids dancing furiously with their cousins in a spontaneous dance party by a cheeky and somewhat subversive for the middle of dinner time command to their local Alexa. Alexa, lights down, beats up. The cousins were not only showing off their dance moves, they were showing off how they could invoke a change of mood and activity in the household by steering the grown-ups, not through their own actions, but through their command of the AI infrastructures that were literally built into the walls of the home, speaker wires and fiber twisting through the pine that framed the house. This anatomy of AI, to me anyways, seems a little more messy than the serene art that can be hung on the museum wall of MoMA, to pick Kate Crawford's work, magnificent work if you haven't seen it. The anatomy of AI now lives between our own childhood-adult relations. While such moments of childhood and parenthood are becoming less and less unique, they do require a reflection on how AI is inbuilt to children's lives and what to do about it. Sherry Turkle, 23 years ago, or I should say 23 years ahead of our time, reflected on this at the turn of the century, literally 2000, by describing a new set of computational interactions that were described by kids anyways as being with objects that were sort of alive and attuned to their conversational and emotional interactions, and that these interactions were generative not just of content, but of creativity and action, from play to pedagogy. Turkle drove home that it was essential to observe and document how this first generation of children are growing up with this new paradigm of relational, computational objects. 23 years later, as AI futures are now rapidly distributing into our now, observing and documenting is necessary, yes, but not sufficient. We are all involved in these processes. Past observation, what does it mean when bedtime stories become a place where tradition and technology meet? Where children's spontaneous movement and dance and subversion of parental authority is also calculated in part by the most likely dance tune data that Amazon has on you. To start to answer what that means, how we are to understand it, and what is to be done about it, you've seen, titled this talk Synthetic Parenthood. Now, synthetic parenthood here does not mean insincere or unnatural. It means to signal that us, the kids, and the AIs are growing amidst each other, and we need to figure out what to do about it. I want to take a moment to note that the center is so great on centering on the child and its research. The research reports that the center puts out rightly frame the child in the center and they have this beautiful language around the child and their adult, as if the adult were an accessory with, a handbag with car keys, right? It's this wonderful moment. I will, though, be speaking from my own kind of intersectional experience of an emerging tech academic and a parent. So that's why I've decided to frame it as I have. So to lay the groundwork on what is to be done about synthetic parenthood, because I don't think we are anywhere near arriving at the answers yet, I just want to raise and have you hopefully take away 3 points. The first, their pedagogies are vernacular. The second, there's creative abundance. And the third, the technical solutions are not. The first point, pedagogies being vernacular. There's probably a Venn diagram of people in this audience or maybe online who want to and are able to explain both those words, right? Pedagogies and vernaculars in the same way, and you know who you are. For those people, I think that diagram will just have to deal with this definition that I'll share with you now. Vernacular pedagogies means that the context of the everyday is where learning happens and where we can affect it. This means our very specific cultural, local, and lived experiences is where we and our digital children learn of AI, learn with AI, and have the levers to shape how we move those actions forward. Here, I actually see a real juxtaposition in the intersection of parent and researcher, and the one that makes me quite excited about some of the work that the center is undertaking. In the wide breadth of research on AI, and research involving children and AI, and research involving children and AI and maybe learning, there are some discernible tropes or groupings of research that we can pick out. Research involving AI and kids seems to center on two assumptions of what there is to know and how we can find that out. And I think you kind of spoke to this. As I see it, when we look at the research that's out there, the first type so there's two assumptions. The first type of assumption creates these research questions that read something like this. How can we use AI to work through and then insert your disorder here? When I say insert your disorder here, it usually comes through a document like the DSM, right? The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, or the International Classification of Diseases. And I want to be clear here, the work that's being undertaken in these assumptions is really important work. It will change lives of children for the better in acutely measurable ways, yeah? And this type of work does not seem to be about how children experience AI and what we should all do about it. These studies do not reflect where children experience AI, why they are engaging with it, or, unless they're adults, of course, have pushed it on them, or how their experiences should craft the future's arrival at Sherry Turkle's relational computers. A second assumption creates research questions and findings that sound something like, here we discover very pertinent things about children and AI tech or AI literacies for or in education. Again, this is very important work. I find its experiments actually fascinating and as its results. And it misses everything that happens in children's lives that are not, in the precise academic language, learning at not school. I take pains to explain these assumptions about the vast majority of work on learning about AI in children because the vast majority of learning children do and will do about AI does not happen and will not happen in these places. Not school is still a thing. How and where children learn of, form with AI is in their everyday. It is their specific cultural context, how their parents and friends interact with, have access to, and reshape their lives around AI. This phenomenon is not a random occurrence. The centers of gravity for AI are not schools, are not universities, nor the government. They're commercial services that we fear might dip into school through essay writing or whatever from time to time, but they exist in and for experiences that are decidedly not school. We don't know institutionally, as learning institutions, how to deal with this yet, which is a separate challenge, but for the synthetic parent and synthetic parenthood, there are some implications. And here, allow me to be a little too clever by half. The missing subject in their pedagogies are vernacular is not just meant to reference the children. They are also the AI. Their pedagogies are vernacular. The missing subject of that sentence is both your child's and the AI. We find that our place is amidst them. Here I note, I'm not trying to say that AI acts on the child or the child acts on the AI. I'm not trying to offer a passive or active phrasing of this relationship. Instead, I use what's called a middle voice, actions from, in, and within, coming from amidst. The implications for this are that a synthetic parenthood amidst AI and children and our own normative aspirations is complicated. More to the point, whether as parents or researchers or observers or users or all of the above, there needs to be both norm critical, offering critique, and norm creative, being generative work. I mean, we can observe and report, but that's not how AI and the markets that drive products work. It's not how governance potentials within these complex systems will work. We sit at a very interesting point with children as they unfold our and their understanding of AI. And it is here, amidst our vernaculars, that our learning practices and governing practices will emerge. It is where the leverage will be to shift understanding and the products of what AI are and will be. To explain this with an example of sorts, I will move to my second point. There's creative abundance. Tomas Saraceno is an artist who makes art that weaves physical threads into networks that show us how we live amongst the digital information networks that seem to help shape our lives. The information age is defined through information abundance. Anything can be known, and any known can be found. The metaphors we've come up with to describe this have shifted over time, from information superhighways to metaphors of webs that connect us and attract our flitterings of attention, trying to trap our patterns of life and platforms that are sticky, and our eyeballs, what they desire. His work might, from this perspective on the screen anyways, let us see how the abundance of information can at times press down on how we live. It shows where power resides and how it relates to things in the network, things like us. Separate to all this information so far, even if in many ways dependent on it, has been creativity. While information has been abundant, creativity remained scarce. Creativity is hard to pin down by knowing everything and finding anything. It is emergent. From what comes before. Good artists borrow, great artists steal, but in ways that are unexpected and joyful. The experiences of AI and children are shifting the assumptions from information abundance to creativity abundance. And I'll pause here just to note, I'm talking about generative AI in a very narrow respect, where I think AI can mean a lot of different things and require a lot of different data. This is around generative AI. For children, so far, I have a few observations. One quote I do like from Steve Jobs is that a computer is like a bicycle for the mind, and if that is true, then emerging AI systems, generative AI systems, seem like rocket skates. Children without fears of AI coming for their jobs are worried about how things were done before or the surveillance that's happening before their eyes. Come with fascination, the same fascination attributable to other parts of their lives. What can I make Alexa say or do is not a test of patience or constant frustration. For these users, it's hours of giggles and community building through playful experimentation. Banana Man explodes from rudimentary sketches to iteration after iteration after iteration, trust me, after iteration of magnificent aesthetic, potentials for narrative, and sometimes even unexpected ideas. In this sense, my family relies on the sort of alive AI to respond to our social prompts in similar ways to how we rely on each other. But we also rely on it in a similar way to how we rely on a board game or any other seemingly inanimate object. These services provide a certain set of creative constraints that engender novel material to emerge through play and experimentation. The bandwidth of creativity unleashed is still to be determined, but, as I said, seems to be rockets strapped to our ankles. I don't think that's to be feared. Even if the ordinary becomes extraordinary at the push of a button, it raises the bar for everything that follows. You can just ask my university students trying to hand in AI-written essays if that works or not. It doesn't. I also think that this means we cannot be complacent in our norm critiquing and norm generating work. The picture of Banana Man I showed you at the start of this talk was white, blonde, able-bodied. We didn't ask it to be this way. The work same-sex couples had to complete to publish a two mums type children book is felt viscerally time and time again when trying to prompt any type of story or visual that deviates from the cultural corpus that AIs produce their material from as they quantify the next probable pixel, word, or motif. And like any great artist, the AI does steal, yes, but I would argue, from, lest we forget, a system of capital and labor that is very well defined and concretized with a ratio of winners that we know very well. All artists were well fed before AI stole their pictures, right? What the similar argument would be for children's creative potential using AI is, I'm not quite sure, but these arguments are being tested in rhetoric suited to echo in media and confuse case law. Thus, like any emerging technology, children and their adults may find AI to amplify wonder and catapult us to forms of creativity that previously seemed unlikely. And like any other technological project, this one quite subtly aligns minds to how it was constructed with a very specific set of corporate interests driving capital growth of the equation, even if it is in ways that aren't quite clear or we don't yet recognize. The reminder for me is that while tales of Banana Man captivate, they are also a caution. They invite us to navigate the webs of creativity and the new digital epoch we are experiencing with both enthusiasm and prudence, cherishing human creativity while opening the door to critically engage with the tools that amplify this creativity. A lot of the interactions children have with these tools will remain in not school. How the abundance in creativity is distributed, engaged with, critically, or even subversively, do matter. I don't see a helpful ethics in trying to dam these flows, but I think we do need to discuss what we're going to do with them. Finally, I'll leave you with the final point in my synthetic parenthood motif, and that's that technical solutions are not. We cannot technology our way out of whatever our concerns might be with these technologies. I say this as a researcher who's invested in learning about how we socialize technology and how technology socializes us. And I've found this to be a messy but mostly constructive process, and I think we need to take that attitude with us. I also say this as a parent who observes and documents parental controls with some bemusement. The very type of critical skills and thinking and questioning we're asking our children to have or be taught around AI and around quote-unquote technology itself is specifically designed to break the parental controls from both technical and social attack vectors. AI protection mechanisms for kids will be no different. So with that, I will just say thank you and end by saying that synthetic parenthood has a lot to deal with. Our everyday is everyone's classroom for AI. There are literally, I guess, no textbooks in the physical sense for this, as AI's capacity and our interactions with it continue to evolve together. It requires a social engagement with them, that is our children, the AIs and the AIs, to craft the lessons we hope to learn and teach. The abundance of creativity will push those with access further than ever before, and there are consequences to this both for those left behind and for the direction our AI compressed cultural corpus directs us to in the future. Finally, the technical fixes to these complex problems are not forthcoming. It takes work. It's a social problem. It takes play. It's a social experience. It takes a synthesis of those involved to navigate what really will be a life-defining relationship for our children with their AI as they relate to us and them. Thank you.
This is a really well-curated series of talks because you've got a load of different accents and you've also got a lot of different perspectives on AI. And unlike Luke, I am really bored about talking about AI. I don't really want to be talking to you about AI any more than you want to hear me talking about AI. I think the ongoing hysteria around AI is massively frustrating to anyone that's thought about technology and society for more than about 5 minutes. It's really annoying that the AI hype is a massive distraction from, I think, a bunch of much more important issues, but much less headline grabbing. And it's really annoying that AI is allowing anybody with a LinkedIn profile and a bit of kind of startup funding to pronounce about how the future of just about anything is going to change around X, Y, and Z. Anyway, having said all that, I want to qualify everything by saying I think it is really important that we engage with AI, but we do so on our own terms. And so my main plea for my talk is that we slow down the conversation. Can we please refocus the current debate towards actually existing AI rather than speculations? Can we please engage seriously with the emerging concerns, I think, of groups who do not stand to gain from the imposition of AI across society, like other groups do, many of the groups in this room? And can we also encourage society-wide discussions around how else AI might be developed and implemented along more equitable, perhaps, or socially beneficial lines in all areas of childhood? The AI that we might want to actually see in our homes, in our schools, in our kindergartens. So I've got a few quick points to kind of around these three headline issues about how we might progress conversations from here on in. And the first one is refocusing the conversation towards actually existing AI. I think there's a real danger that the current levels of hype and speculation are going to lead to a huge backlash against AI. And I think we need to work to reset the agenda, to reset the policy agenda, to reset the news media agendas, to reset public and professional imaginations around AI. There's definitely a need to push back, I think, against AI as an area of hyperbole and overselling. There are huge claims currently being made around AI and children, for example, children's lives. Dramatic claims for what AI might do in terms of mental health or in terms of education, well-being, cognitive development, safety. There's a trend for IT firms, I think, to massively overstate their AI credentials, what a lot of people call AI theatre. A lot of AI is not AI at all, it's just programming. There are rushed responses from policymakers and also from sector leaders. And I think there are exaggerated expectations and speculative AI imaginaries, kind of based around sci-fi, based around patents and corporate spin that are never going to come to fruition. So I think it's up to experts in the area of digital childhood, which I'm guessing is all of us, or at least all of you lot, to push back against these ideas of, general AI, superintelligence, singularity, digital minds, and all the other kind of speculations that we're kind of having to engage with at the moment. And instead, focus on what Divya Sadath describes as actually existing AI, the actual computational, material, metaphysical limits of what AI technology is actually capable of doing. And I think it's really interesting to think about AI in these terms. And these terms push us to think about AI in terms of its absolute limitations. The fundamental question then, referring back to the previous two talks, about which aspects of children's lives can be satisfactorily represented through data, and which aspects of children's lives are dramatically reduced when we try and do that, or actually sidelined altogether. Because I think there's a lot about digital childhood that's not quantifiable. So I think we really need to think about the limitations of AI as mathematical computational statistics, because that's all it is, and encourage more realistic understandings around the capability of these mathematical statistical products to approximate things like human traits. For example, what sort of creativity are we really talking about here? What sort of intelligences are we making a claim that AI is aligned with? And in terms of intelligence, it's really interesting to read someone like Melanie Mitchell, who points out that AI is great for kind of information processing models of mind, where intelligence is something like that's brain-based and disembodied, but it's not really good for other types of human intelligences. Embodied cognition, common sense, emotions, intuition, irrational thinking, all the things that kind of make up the complexity of what it is to have human intelligence. And I think these sorts of nuances are getting lost in the debate around smart nappies and self-driving prams and AI in childhood. So I think we need to be upfront about the strengths and also the limitations of this technology, and focus on, there are some amazing capabilities of this tech. This tech is really, really useful, but not overreaching and getting pushed into over-promising things that this technology just simply isn't capable of, and I think will never be capable of. So when Kate Crawford talks about emotion recognition, for example, you cannot recognise emotions from the face, and technology is not capable of recognising emotions, so we need to kind of pull back. The second point then is to engage seriously, I think, with the emerging concerns that we're seeing around AI from marginalised groups and social critics. There's a real danger that we ignore some really considerable issues relating to how the technology is actually being used and experienced in the wild. And I think we need to take on the concerns of people that a lot of the AI industry and tech classes might dismiss as non-experts or Luddites or laggards. It's really interesting when you push back a bit about AI, how you get accused of not knowing about AI, or you've never built AI, you don't understand. There is growing pushback against the presence of AI technologies in society. So the European Commission a couple of years ago designated AI in education, along with things such as robot-assisted surgery, as high risk, which I think is pretty sensible. In education, we're seeing student protests against personalised learning systems. We're seeing public protests against the use of facial recognition technology by police, because it's inherently racist, it's inherently oppressive. We're seeing TV and film writers protesting against AI-generated scripts and all the rest of it. But also we're seeing an emerging academic literature that is against AI. It's interesting that everyone's been talking about Kate Crawford, but there's some really interesting other authors coming on stream. Dan McQuillan's book on resisting AI is particularly interesting. Now, a lot of AI policy people and tech industry don't care about this at all. They're just ignoring it. It makes no difference at all. Others are very quick to dismiss any criticism that you're misinformed, you don't understand the basics of the technology, you're anti-innovation, etc., etc. But instead, I think it's really worth them engaging with these criticisms. What are these criticisms telling us about AI? What are these criticisms perhaps telling us about the future direction that our work might have to take as academics? And I think if you think about these criticisms in a bit more detail, they're actually more balanced than people's gut reactions might assume. Most critics of AI are not completely opposed to the presence of the technology in everyday life. They're actually raising specific concerns about particular applications of AI. So, for example, in education, critics are raising concerns over forms of AI that they think are not educationally beneficial. So forms of AI that standardise or constrain teaching and learning, for example, or Andra was talking about data valence in the classroom. AI applications that detract from the ability of teachers to actually exert their professional expertise or their human judgment. Applications of AI that perhaps diminish the social relations of the classroom or lead to a kind of hollowing out, dehumanisation even of educational processes. And if you think about the criticisms about AI in society, these critics are actually raising very specific concerns about forms of AI that are not equitable or empowering for all. So where AI is actually acting to increase inequality or disadvantage or discrimination or injustice. AI tools that are acting as a form of surveillance, or what Andra called data valence. And AI applications that are allowing commercial interests to kind of profit financially from children. Now, of course, none of this is the intention of AI developers or IT firms, I'm sure. They'd say, oh, we're not trying to do it, but these are the consequences of how their products are now actually being used and actually being experienced when they're being implemented in real life. And I think that's the kind of thing that people like us need to think about. We can get excited about AI in childhood, but we also need to think a little bit more deeply about how the insertion of these tools in everyday contexts is perhaps altering the conditions or the relations and the moods of those contexts. If it's a child's home, for example, or a kindergarten, or their doctor's surgery, putting AI into those contexts is altering the conditions of what it is. And how AI is being differentially experienced by different groups. It's very easy for us to talk about the affordances of Alexa or smart nappies or generative AI, DALL-E in terms of drawing Banana Man. We're coming from a very particular point of view. AI tends to advantage those children, those young people, those families who are already advantaged. So any benefits of AI are not one size fits all, everyone gets to experience them. It's really important to think about, as Dan McQuillan talks about, how AI has a tendency to disadvantage, as he puts it, a tendency to punch down. AI has statistical fragility, and those statistical fragilities tend to end up hurting the less privileged. And I think we also need to think about the politics of how and where these AI technologies are being applied, where they're being applied, in which classrooms, in which schools. And again, it's interesting to think about when AI meets institutions. These tools can exacerbate oppressive politics of any institution. So the exclusionary politics of a welfare system, or the surveillance politics of a school system, for example, the gender dynamics of the household. And I'm reminded here about Abina Behrn's a brilliant essay a couple of years ago called Fair Warning. And she uses the work of Joseph Weissenbaum, who in the 70s was reminding us that the computer has from the very beginning been a fundamentally conservative force. And 50 years later, Behrn is arguing that in place of fundamental social change, AI allows technical solutions that keep existing power relations intact, power hierarchies intact, that reinforce the status quo. If you stick AI tools into a school, it's going to reinforce the hierarchical nature of the school. That's how schools work, that's how technologies work. So a lot of people are beginning to talk about AI along these lines, and these are not unfair attacks on the technology. I think these are the realities of how the technologies are being applied in real life context. So this is the sort of thing that I think it's up to us to start paying attention to and perhaps start responding to. Which leads me to my final point, which I think it's really important for people like us to try and work out ways, other ways. How might AI be otherwise is a really interesting question to ask. We want a new set of conversations about AI and childhood, not just picking up on the corporate hype and reiterating it. Even if we're criticising it, we're still reiterating it and amplifying it, but thinking really, really differently. It's not easy because the conversations around AI are nuts. If you go on Twitter still, or X as it's now called, if you look at some of how the big AI behemoths are talking to each other, the level of debate has just descended into kind of name-calling, and it's not a very kind of sophisticated debate amongst AI professionals, amongst policymakers, amongst many of them. But it's up to us, people like us, who work in academia, civil society, third sector, whatever you want to call it, to have an opportunity not to fall into these same traps. And I think from this point onwards, it might be really useful for us to think about how we might find common spaces to bring together all the different elements of the AI conversation and move forward. And at the moment, the discussions are taking place in silos. AI companies are just talking to shareholders and investors. AI enthusiasts are going to their own little conferences and talking amongst themselves, and AI critics are perhaps in half a space like this talking to themselves as well. How can we bring these groups together? And there are ways of doing this. And I'm really heartened by some of the organisations that are more based around human rights than human capital in terms of pushing back. So Council of Europe, for example, or UNESCO or UNICEF have really kind of brought some really interesting reports recently that raise some of these issues in ways that allow policymakers and industry to actually engage with them. There are also models about how we might achieve really interesting conversations that are not just hype mongering. We've got organisations in the US such as AI Now, the Turing Institute, Weissenbaum Institute. Even in the UK, an organisation like Nesta, for example, is just organising this civic AI laboratory, which they describe as a space for learning about artificial intelligence, but they also refer to it as a space for us to move beyond what they call a breathless and polarised AI discourse. We can have adult, grown-up conversations about what types of AI technology we might want collectively. I think we can do that. So I guess that's all I'm asking for. We need more efforts like this about children and young people, where we can actually bring the AI proponents, the AI critics, the AI agnostics, the marginalised, the people in the middle all together, and talk about the actual uses that we might want. And we can also amplify voices that are not already in the conversations. So I believe this can happen. I think nearly everybody that talks about AI and children is on the same page. We all want the best for children. I think there are very few people who are genuinely evil and want to kind of harm children, but we're coming at it from different perspectives, different agendas, different motivations. Most people trying to push AI into education or health or welfare or any other aspect of children's lives, I think, are concerned about matters of equality or empowerment. They're not stupid. They're not complete monsters. And most critics of AI are not wholly opposed to the tech either. So I think in talking about AI, digital childhoods, digital futures, we can work hard and centre efforts of centres like this about foregrounding the matters, the things that they think really matter. This current phase of AI hysteria is going to pass. We're in an AI spring at the moment. I'm sure we're going to hit an AI winter. All the excitement's going to dissipate. All the money is going to disappear. And so I think we need to work really hard to ensure that we all progress into a more constructive phase where these technologies are actually realised along more equitable, more genuine, empowering and beneficial lines. And that's what something like this centre can do. So, thank you very much.
So, first of all, just thank you very much to Andra, Luke and Neil for their presentations. I hadn't thought about whether we were curating accents at all. I'm disappointed I haven't got an AI agent that can obviously help me plan that sort of thing a bit better. So we've now got the opportunity to try to synthesize some of the different perspectives, if that's what we want to do, or to ask direct questions of any one or all of the speakers. And I'm also particularly want to support Loretta, who's over there, partly because she's driven the organisation of this event, but partly because she's going to act as a conduit between the online questions and the questions in the room. So we have some roving microphones. Is that right? Do we have some roving? We have a roving microphone, two roving microphones. Perhaps people would like to help. Can I ask for a roving? Thanks, Andy. And I've just been time-filling, basically, to get organised so you can prepare your questions. And it's my job to help try and organise the conversation for the next 30 or 40 minutes. And then we can invite you to join us for not drinks, because of some saga with the licence here at ACMI, and canapés. Or do people say canapés anymore, or are we in the 1920s? To enjoy the conversation more in smaller groups. So, who wants to go first with any questions? We had a good range of different perspectives, so I can't believe in the middle at the back there, please. And Loretta, can you sort of wave at me when you get questions coming through online?
Thanks for that. I'm interested in where children are actually taking control of AI or using it for solving their problems. I'm sort of taking as my touchstone some work that Kirill Potapov did with his students, where he gave them, well, they actually took up tracking devices to control their sleep and eating habits that they were particularly worried about. So I'm wondering if one of the ways of thinking about this is thinking about the way that children can use AI to internalise some of the knowledge, the things that they want to do, and to control both themselves, both that internal control, the signs, but also the external control of their environment, turning down the lights and turning on the music, the tools of their environment. Do we have examples, or do we have ways of thinking about that?
Thanks so much. Andra, do you want to, is that fair to pick on you to ask? And even if it's not fair?
Well, I can start. Okay, now I can start, I think. Yeah, thank you for the question. Let's say in Estonia, we haven't yet made any research where we would engage with young children and ask how they are using AI-based technologies as such. But I think there is some very interesting research on this topic actually coming from here in Australia, where school students are using tracking technologies, especially in schools where, for instance, this kind of Fitbit and similar fitness devices are demanded as part of the physical education classes. And I have read some research on this saying that this children are also kind of frustrated of these technologies because they are not really providing them fair results. Let's say if you are biking, let's say from home to school, this kind of physical activity is not measured by these devices, and then they are very frustrated that only concrete steps or running is being measured, and why they will not receive a grade for that kind of physical activities, or when they are going swimming or things like that. So yeah, definitely I think it's really important to engage children and have additional opportunities for them to explore the use of these technologies, and also for the different tech companies in itself to also accommodate the criticisms that the young people themselves have when using these technologies, because otherwise they soon realize that their expectations are not really being met, and they will not use these technologies any longer. It's just a very short-term opportunity that they decide to grab.
So I think, if I understand the question, I mean, I think that there have been techniques for, I guess, control that a psychologist might give children to employ themselves, and you know, it's a useful technique. I don't think I have anything against a similar mechanism through digital means. I think that at the same time, what maybe becomes a problem is when the validity of that data becomes sacrosanct, right? And I think we saw that probably between the two, not my presentations, but the two other presentations, where one, you know, we can't argue with that data, that becomes part of the logic, then that's a problem. And two, the internalization of that type of tracking, I think could be a step change to other techniques we have to control ourselves. I would be wary as an academic and as a parent to put that logic pretty far down the age categories, and I don't have a cutoff for that, but I think internalizing that logic, which, you know, goes into quantified self. Some people find that very helpful and very productive in their lives. I'm not sure that's like a set of choices that we should comfortably engage children with, if that makes sense.
That's a really good question. I haven't got any particular examples that I could give. There's a couple of things spring to mind. People always want to look for best practice, best use cases, best case scenarios. I think those are really interesting, and you can do some really cool stuff with this tech, but not everybody can do the same things. Just because I can do cool things with the tech doesn't mean to say that lots of other people couldn't for all sorts of other reasons. I think another thing that says a lot of this AI tech is not something that you do. It's something that's done to you. It's in the background. It's not something that you use. It's something that's applied to you, often through institutions as well. So the types of AI we really need to think about is the AI in the background that we don't get to see or even know that's there. So it's really interesting to think about generative, like ChatGPT, for example, is a complete distraction. What's really interesting is when that technology gets integrated into all the tech that we use every day and we don't know that it's there. So I'm interested about that stuff. And then finally, it is really interesting to think about what tech people actually want. And this isn't children, but when you think about uses of AI that might be slightly resistant or might advantage groups that aren't already being advantaged, you come up with some really interesting examples. So there's lots of AI predictive crime analytics, for example, and it tends to predict crime in poor areas, blah, blah, blah. So there was a really interesting art experiment where they actually developed some AI that predicted white-collar crime, which was completely different. Didn't go against the power hierarchies at all. And there's some really other interesting examples of where AI is used to benefit other groups. So protesters in Seattle using facial recognition to recognise cops, for example. So there are ways that this technology can be turned against and the power can be inverted. So it's just interesting to think about those sorts of issues. And yeah, there are some really cool things that some kids can use, but I'm yet to see it.
Thanks. We've got a question from online, but do wave at me if you want to ask a question. So Loretta, do you want to read out to whoever's...
So this question's from Tamar Lever, who's one of our chief investigators in the centre. He says, firstly, thanks to all of today's speakers, all offering super important perspectives on AI. My question really lies then with the question of how we actually demarcate what isn't AI when those two words increasingly mean almost all technology, such as, just as context, Biden's AI rules announced yesterday read like a way to regulating technologies as much as just AI.
Thanks. who wants to have a... You don't all have to answer every question, so have a go if you want to.
Hello, Tarma Lever. That's why I like the term automated decision making, because some of the technologies I'm most interested in is that, or algorithmic processing, and then there's generative AI. So there are different flavours of AI, but I like automated decision making.
Yeah, I left out a chunk on Biden's stuff somewhat because of that, and I think it's I think it's a hard question because it is being decided by the hype machine, right? It's not being decided in the rooms like this. It's not being decided. It's being decided by the guy with the profile on LinkedIn. So it becomes a pretty poisonous term when you're trying to do something productive in a social capacity.
Yeah, and perhaps I would just add that I think this is also the term that different scholars are unable to interpret or define quite concretely, and this is also the result what we found when trying to do some kind of a lit review about AI-based technologies and its use in education. Basically, all these scholars are interpreting what AI-based technology means in different ways. And therefore, this is part of the problem I think we are trying to solve. Everybody tries to figure it out what it actually means, but everybody's slightly having a different opinion on this.
I'd just like to echo that the lack of precision is in itself really interesting, because as Neil talked about, the sort of, we've had this sort of wave of, up to 2016, we had the good internet that was going to transform democracy. Then post-Trump, we had the bad internet. We've had platformization, surveillance capitalism, datafication. Now we're into an era of AI. There are a series of terms that cluster a lot of related concepts, and we should probably all do a better job in trying to help distinguish them. Have you got another question, Loretta? In the absence of anybody waving, Loretta wins.
Okay. This question's from Chloe Shorten. She says, Faye Halleberg's research tells us for these mothers, digital care can be extended through the mobile phone as a form of remote mothering, as it enables mothers to bridge the space and time gap between the domestic and work worlds. However, the expectation to be constantly available also creates a double work paradox for mothers. How can we help mothers to push back on the messages to control their children better? And how do we get mothers who don't have a voice to be heard? As mothers are the ones now having to do the digital parenting, what can AI do for them?
Go for it.
Yeah, thank you. This is definitely a good question. Of course, there are many labels created by many different scholars when they talk about this topic. We talk about devicification of parenting or devicification of mothering. We talk about datalogical construction of motherhood. We talk about empowering technologies. So it depends and boils down to the perspective of each of the scholars, what kind of let's say, tone and mood they papers are taking. But in terms of trying to help out parents, I think it's still important to acknowledge that you really do not need to make use of any of the technologies, AI-based or otherwise. You can still be a good parent without these technologies as well. So it's no need to go along with the hype, basically, and try to buy off all these different gadgets. You can still be a good parent without all of those.
It's also really interesting that you raised the issue of the work that's involved in using AI is exhausting, and there's so much work around the edges of an AI technology to keep it functioning, to feed it the right data, to keep it going. But this idea of AI being labour-saving or time-saving is nonsense. It takes more work and it takes more time. What Alexa Taylor calls photomation, so it's false automation. So I think that's really important to stress and to raise it and call it out. And that's what mothers can do, just talk about the extra work that they have to do to make these things operate and how much stressful it is. If we start saying these things out loud, then more and more people begin to kind of acknowledge it. So I think that's really interesting. And just as a final sidebar conversation, we were talking about labour. it's the labour that also lies behind these machines, the people in the global south that are doing the content moderation or the kind of managing behind the scenes. It's not algorithms and technology doing it, it's very poor people on $1 an hour that are filtering out stuff that ChatGPT wouldn't dare show someone in the global north. I could go on. Did you see that smile on Julian's face?
No, that's great. Who's got a question? Nicola.
I really like what you're saying about you having these conversations, Neil, because, I mean, around the conceptualization that you were talking about, to me, artificial intelligence is like not human intelligence. And I think back to the last century in the 90s when the sort of the human-computer interactions conversations started and how we've lost that or something. Everything with artificial intelligence is like ChatGPT is cheating. And, like open book exams used to be cheating, different technology. And my colleagues, Mary Clancis and Bill Cope, they talk about cyber-social rather than artificial. And sort of it links back with pedagogy of multiliteracies. But, because what we're hearing so far is like banning it. And we don't have those conversations because everything's reduced to the minutiae of good and bad. What is a good parent? What is good education? What defines educational success? High stakes tests, and I don't know how to start how to start those conversations with policymakers though is the challenge, because they even if you have to try and have a conversation about high stakes testing, not giving you just one type of bit of information about children, there are alternative ways you're gone in those conversations.
Yeah, maybe policymakers are the wrong place to start. I mean, I've had really productive conversations about AI and education with the trade unions, for example, and kind of teacher associations and student groups and stuff. And so I think perhaps there are other areas of society that we can perhaps engage with, and policymakers, I think, are in a bind. I mean, none of them are stupid, and they know everything that you've just talked about, but they're not able to act on it. So I think that's why we need to spread these conversations out across civil society.
That's great. Do you want...
I mean, just to add to that, I think having those conversations, that called the grown-up conversations, are actually quite difficult. And I'll say why. I mean, so Stiony, you pointed to the Civic AI Observatory as an interesting place, and these other interesting places where these conversations are happening. I mean, I've observed these really radical shifts, right? So, look where OpenAI started, and how it's going now, right? Here's a conversation that happened. There's a really fascinating case study in terms of an example, for me anyways, about a service now called Do Not Pay. And it was started as this like AI lawyer for you not to pay your parking tickets because the man was getting you down and you could fight the man and da-da-da-da-da. And it's transitioned to this really weird line where it's like a subscription model to have an AI operating system for your life. But it's this like capitalist move against the system of capitalism to try to automate away our automated overlords. Like, it's this really strange place that we get to. So when we see what happens to those, I mean, my presentation was all airy and light, but when we see what happens to those adult conversations, we end up in a dark place. So yeah.
But other forms of AI are possible. They just announced the Discovery projects 2 days ago, and there's a really interesting one about Indigenous perspectives on AI. There are feminist perspectives on AI. There are anti-fascist perspectives on AI. We've got a particular model, but there are other flavours are available.
Thanks so much. We've got another question online, I think. Yeah, it's okay.
This question's from Lilia Green from the Digital Child Centre. She says, what risks might reside in some younger children's beliefs that AI virtual assistants such as Siri and Alexa are real people and their friends?
Who wants to do the risks?
Just an argument I heard from an AI tech bro who said there's no problem about that because they think teddy bears are real as well. So there's no, but I think that's completely disingenuous because teddy bears don't feed data back up to third parties.
Can I prevail on you, Andra? Have you got anything from there?
Yeah, well, it's a personal story, really. I have 9-year-old twins, and they just got a new phone, the phone that they themselves now also have Siri with them. And as soon as they had their phone, they started having these conversations with Siri and asking all kinds of things from Siri. And I was so frustrated asking, like, can you really understand that there is not a real person responding back to you? That it's actually all artificial, and we try to have these conversations with them, but for them it was just so much fun, and I'm not really sure that they till this point understand that there is not a human being with whom they consider now quite a good friend, because they know all kinds of answers to the questions that sometimes mother cannot respond to. So I think there is definitely tons of research that is currently needed for this kind of interactions, to studying really empirically what and how young people and children are interacting with these technologies and how they make sense of it. So currently there is still too little empirical studies where we can say exactly what this might mean.
And I think like the interesting assumption there, right? I think there's risks there, don't get me wrong, but the interesting assumption is there's a real person at the end of the line, and I think, I mean, like observationally, that's our assumption as adults. I don't find the children have that same assumption. You can converse with a computer in ways you could not previously. We have a mouse and a graphic user interface, and so there's risks in making that identification, but I think it's fascinating to me that I think the assumption of, well, they think there's a real person there might actually have more to do with us and our understanding about computers than the technology that generates the next probable word that we're not going to call AI.
Thanks. And I think Lilia's question also speaks to the framing of the question about the risks. I think we shouldn't underestimate, I mean, picking up on Neil's observation about different kind of communities approaching this problem differently, we shouldn't underestimate how the construction of AI as a, and I quote, existential threat is clearly part of the public discourse, however under-investigated or under-theorized or under-realized such a kind of framing is. But it's a very important part of the discussion that if we're going to enter into further discussions, we need to be able to know a bit more about. And we have one more question, another question online, I think. Oh no, we've got one in the audience. Hooray! You're all being very shy here.
I was just curious if you know anything about this one. So you mentioned about the parents tracking their children. Is there any research in Australia around what percentage of parents are doing that, and what psychologists say that effect is on the child?
I don't know. This panel can help with that question. I mean, do you know anything? Can you answer that from a European perspective, Andra, or not? Which isn't obviously the answer, but is likely to be statistically similar.
Yeah, well, the last time we had, let's say, slightly more information about how this kind of tracking technologies are being used in Europe are from 2018, when EU Kids Online had a larger survey in 25 countries. And I think at the time, the median was about 15% in Europe. In Estonia at the time it was 22% of parents, but now like 5 years has gone by, and I think these technologies are really becoming much more used than they were. And of course in US this is very, very common. But again, currently cannot come up with any concrete percentages from the top of my head.
And again, subject to the caveats that Neil drew attention to about the unequal distribution of these technologies and the ways that they're used unequally by different social groups. Gavin, and then we'll go online.
Okay. So I'm going to try to pull together some ideas that I've been having listening, so I apologize if this is not quite fleshed out yet, but I thought the thing of saying to slow down and talk about the AI that we have now is interesting, because I think it's even worthwhile not talking about the AI at all, but talking about what we're talking about, because what I think the speculation around AI has become is an abyss in the kind of literal sense of the word, of being a boundless darkness and a endless vastness. But within art, there's a meson abyss where we can put ourselves back into that and reflect ourselves back into it. Because I was at a panel recently and talking about what technology actually is, and it was suggested that a lot of the time what it is a reflection of our own insecurities and anxieties about what it is to be a person at all. And when we look at what we're worried about AI taking away from us, I think that reflects a lot of the time this lack of a sense of what we actually are. So, you know, we're kind of disenchanted with what it is to be human now. There is no grand narrative around religion and transcendental spirituality, but as it was pointed out, there still are things that can't be quantified. We still do have what would have previously been called a soul. So I think when we look at AI and we look at the labor that's involved in what AI can potentially do or is suggested to do, it reflects the idea of what a robot is originally in a play from 100 years ago, thereabouts. And robots are the kind of Taylorist version of a person. They are the executive function of a person that add labor value, but they are not people. And I think we can maybe think about our concerns about AI in a similar way, and then therefore stare into the abyss in the hopes of pulling ourselves back out of it. We can say that AI potentially might streamline a lot of these labor things or not, or add complications to labor and take it away from people and reduce our income and our equality. But simultaneously, I think it allows us to think about what we want to be, what it actually means to be human, what is valuable about the human and valuable about everybody, therefore, that cannot be taken away from us, that cannot be technologized or digitalized. So I think thinking about AI as an abyss and thinking about ourselves as a part of the abyss or something that can be put back into the abyss is a different way of thinking about AI, because it allows us to think about not AI, but about humans and what it is to be human, not think about the technology.
So when I said we need to broaden the conversation amongst groups like this, that's what I meant. So yes, we need to look into the abyss. I love on a very trite note, I was fascinated by the generative ChatGPT, all students are going to cheat, which was just hilarious, because that was just us reflecting on how insecure we are about universities, assessment, not trusting students. And then what do we find? It's professors that are cheating by writing ARC rejoinders on ChatGPT. It's not the students at all. More seriously though, it's got, again, because my work's in education, one of the interesting things to think about is what is it that a teacher can do that AI cannot do and can never do? And a lot of people will come up with, well, it's emotional, I can engage empathetically with Julian and look him in the eye. And that's the thing that a human can do. And so the answer then is, we'll just have a load of very low-paid humans in classrooms with AI. Well, what is it that an expert, professional, highly trained teacher can do that AI can't? And then that's really tricky. And that gets you into all sorts of crazy conversations about what it means to learn with a brain and then model that to someone else with a brain. How we learn through embodied gestures or how we learn through the utterance. What it means to be spontaneous or to improvise. And those are really interesting conversations about what it means to be a human teaching as opposed to a robot teaching. I think those are the sorts of conversations we need to have. So you're spot on.
I'm going to not ask. If you don't mind, I'm going to move through because I've got one other person here, and then we'll go to the online, and then we'll probably wrap up.
Thank you for your research. The question I have that we seem to be returning to is to do with maldistribution. And if we view generative AI as simply tools, an extension of us to really simplify things in terms of capability or capacity or ability, have any of you given thought to solutions for dealing with the maldistribution of these tools?
I think that's a really important point, because I think, you said there's different AI, right? And I would suggest it's all just stats, and there's different distributions of AI, right? Whether it's this chat GPT or that chat GPT, it sound like a gun nut. It's how you use it, but in all reality, it's about the distribution, right? So if you're going to generate something computationally, where it's generated from, with whom is what matters. The code is the code, and we'll get hammered for that, but sure. So I think that's hugely important. In terms of solutions, so far we've seen it on the fringes, right? The ZZ project is like this generative AI about querying data and querying data sets and querying drag by creating these kind of like generative performers as a performance. So there's places where it happens. The problem, which I've said before, seems to be when that gets subsumed, when that distribution gets subsumed by other patterns of distribution. So the do not pay, here's your AI to fight the man, until it becomes part of that structure. The work of indigital, looking at different types of indigenous applications of AI, great. How do we move that from a small thing to a bigger thing? Michaela's speaking to the WC, great, but where does it come back to Australia? I don't know, it's a tough question.
Do you want to add to this, Andra, or shall I move on?
Perhaps I will just add that I think in terms of the generative AI, definitely a lot of work is ongoing and is useful in the English-speaking world, but when we, especially like me coming from a very small language community, then we are also dependent on technologies that are built somewhere else, and this small language community is always like slightly left behind of these new innovations, and I think this is also why Estonia is like really trying to go along with the hype that helps us keep up with the West, or whatever is referred to when we think of the West.
Thanks. And then let's end with the last question online.
Sure.
Thanks.
So this is from Megan Easton from the Isolated Children's Parents Association. She says, how can we support rural and remote families with a low digital literacy or accessibility to hardware and services, not get left behind, and adequately prepare them for rapidly developing expectations?
So we'll move along the line.
Give them lots of money, decent housing, decent education. There's so much more you need to do about and then also give them decent infrastructure, I would say. But I mean, yeah.
Do you have anything to add to the?
Well, I would also add that it's important to give them voice, so that they would be engaged in these discussions and that they would have an opportunity to reflect upon the experiences, because otherwise these technologies will never be useful for them, or still they are being seen as more marginalized, more vulnerable groups. So voice is important.
Okay, thanks so much. I'm going to wrap up now. There's no summary to this discussion, because as is clear, to pursue Gavin's analogy, we're in the middle of the belly of the beast, as it were. And if AI helps us reflect on questions of social justice, if it helps us reflect on what a real existential threat would be, then this discussion is going to contribute towards a better understanding of some of those wider social and political issues. I want to thank Neil and Luke and Andra very much for their careful and thoughtful and committed presentations. I think it's been really inspiring to hear the range of different kind of perspectives and understandings. And I do hope, above all, that at the Digital Child Centre and other forms of civil society, of groupings, of gatherings like this, that the kinds of conversations to engage people more generally in a much broader public discussion about what is going on with our sense of selves, to our sense of values, and to questions about the role of technology in everyday life are taken seriously and are given a voice and are heard, because otherwise I think what has absolutely come across from all three speakers, if they'll forgive me, is that at the moment we are not driving these kind of conversations, and the sets of commercial and capital interests that are leading them have their own interests at heart that clearly aren't going to be shared by wider democratic or progressive societies. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Andra, Luke and Neil. And please join us for drinks and things to eat. And please enjoy the discussions. Thank you.